Admiral Vox stood in the war room, staring at the holographic projection of the human ship. It was nothing more than a speck on the map, a small, primitive vessel by any standard. Yet the destruction it had wrought was undeniable. 3 military outposts reduced to ash. 7 warships crippled. And now, it had the audacity to vanish again, leaving nothing but chaos in its wake. This human must be captured, Vox muttered under his breath. Once and for all. The towering doors of the war room slid open, and High Commander Ziv entered. His 6 eyes blinked in unison, a clear sign of his resolve. Vox, ever the pragmatist, stood taller in his presence, sensing the weight of the situation. Ziv's words were sharp and deliberate. Admiral, we cannot let this continue. Our fleet cannot be reduced to this, laughing stock. This human is a threat to the very heart of the hegemony. Vox nodded slowly. The hegemony, an empire that had ruled over countless star systems for 12,000 cycles, had never faced a foe quite like this. A human, seemingly insignificant in the grand expanse of the galaxy, had become a symbol of defiance. This wasn't about territory or resources anymore, it was about pride, about control. You have your orders, Ziv continued, his voice cold. We're sending everything. 50 ships, including our most advanced vessels. This human will either be captured or eliminated. Vox's mind raced, but he kept his face impassive. He knew the stakes. The hegemony's military superiority was unmatched. How could one human challenge that? Their ships were outfitted with state-of-the-art weaponry and shields. Their commanders were trained to handle every conceivable scenario. Yet this one human had outsmarted them all. 50 ships, Vox repeated, as if testing the weight of the number. If this human is as capable as our reports suggest, it might take more than that. Ziv's eyes narrowed. We will have her, Vox. We must. The projection flickered, showing a detailed map of the galaxy. A star system in the Arcturus sector blinked with a red alert. It was the most recent location where the human ship had been spotted. A vessel smaller than any hegemony warship, but faster, more agile, and capable of disabling entire fleets with terrifying precision. The fleet was already on its way, and their first destination was clear. We launch in 2 cycles, Ziv declared. The human will not escape again. Meanwhile, aboard the human ship, Cassandra Hayes sat in the dim glow of the cockpit, her hands steady on the controls. The ship hummed softly around her, an ancient vessel by the standards of the galaxy's advanced civilizations, but it was hers. She had made it hers. Her thoughts drifted back to the day she had been caught, when she had been taken from Earth along with her parents. She had been young, just a girl, caught in the hegemony's net. They had called it Project Ascension, an experiment to create soldiers with mental abilities, beings who could manipulate technology with their minds. But her parents, both brilliant scientists, had been part of a failed attempt. The hegemony had turned them into test subjects, and then, once their usefulness was gone, discarded them. But Cassandra had survived. She had escaped, using the very powers they had sought to harness. And now, she was using those powers to strike back. Her fingers brushed the control panel, and a small, sinister smile played at the corners of her lips. The hegemony had underestimated her from the beginning, and they would do so again. They thought they could send 50 ships to capture one human. But they had no idea what they were up against. 50 ships, she whispered to herself. Let's see how they handle this. She tapped into the ship's systems, her mind effortlessly bypassing the simple defenses in place. The hegemony had always underestimated humans, even after everything they'd learned. They still saw humans as primitive, as weak. But Cassandra wasn't weak. And she had learned how to make them pay for their arrogance. Back on the hegemony flagship, Vox was already assembling his fleet. The atmosphere in the command center was tense, with officers scurrying about, ensuring everything was in place. Vox watched as the fleet's final preparations were made, his mind still working through the details of the plan. Every moment they delayed was another chance for the human to slip through their fingers. Admiral, said Nexer, his second-in-command, approaching him with a data pad in hand. We've received another transmission from the human ship. It's a warning. Vox looked up sharply. A warning? From one human? Yes, sir, Nexer replied. It says, and I quote, "You're wasting your time." Vox stared at Nexer, his mandibles clicking in frustration. This is madness. How can one human know our moves? How could she possibly predict our strategy? Get me everything we have on her. Now. As the hegemony fleet set course for the humans' location, Cassandra's ship slipped into the shadows of the galaxy, the stars outside fading into the blackness of space. The hunt was on. But Cassandra was no prey. She was the hunter now. The silence in the war room of the inevitable conquest was heavy, punctuated only by the occasional hum of a console or the subtle shift of armor as officers moved. The fleet had launched, a vast armada, now cutting through the void of space toward the Arcturus system. 50 ships, each brimming with advanced weaponry and unshakable confidence, stood ready for one mission, to capture or eliminate the human known as Cassandra Hayes. Admiral Vox stood at the center of it all, his sharp eyes scanning the tactical display as his fleet navigated through the cold expanse. The projection of Hayes' vessel flickered, a small human shuttle, its simplicity standing in stark contrast to the sprawling might of the hegemony. Yet, that tiny vessel had already taken down a third of Vox's fleet. How? Sir, Commander Krell, the head of the fleet's assault division, spoke up, his voice gravelly as he adjusted his exoskeleton. We're approaching the system where she was last seen. If the data's correct, her ship should be here. Vox glanced at the star map. There, amidst the Arcturus nebula, was the pinpoint location of the human ship. The light from nearby stars glinted off the fleet's hulls as they closed in, their engines singing a quiet but deadly tune. Keep your formations tight, Vox commanded. We don't know what we're up against yet, but we will approach with caution. He turned to his chief strategist, Nexer, who was monitoring the human vessel's movements. Any sign of her yet? Nothing, Nexer replied, his sensory appendages twitching. She's either incredibly good at hiding, or she's moved. A cold, unsettling thought gripped Vox's chest. Hayes had already outsmarted them once. What if she was already setting a trap? Increase speed. Prepare for. Suddenly, the entire command room shook. A burst of static filled the air. Vox's heart skipped a beat. What's happening? The comms officer's voice trembled. Admiral, we've lost contact with 2 of our forward scouts. They've gone dark. The holographic map blinked, and Vox saw the 2 scout ships, once glowing bright on the radar, now flickering out of existence like faint stars swallowed by the dark. Vox's instincts kicked in. Where's Hayes? Just as he barked the question, the tactical officer's voice rang through the room. Target detected, Admiral. It's her, she's in our sights. The human ship had appeared from the dense cluster of asteroids that bordered the nebula. Despite its size and primitive design, it was moving with a grace that defied logic, weaving in and out of the rocky formations like a serpent in a maze. The fleet closed in, weapons at the ready. Lock on, all ships, Vox ordered, his tone steely. Prepare to fire on my command. But as his finger hovered over the button, something strange happened. The human ship, which should have been vulnerable in the open space between the asteroids, darted forward, impossibly fast. It didn't retreat into the depths of the nebula, it accelerated, as if daring the hegemony to catch it. Increase speed, Vox shouted, his pulse quickening. She's not running. She's inviting us in. Krell's voice echoed in the tense room. We have her cornered. This is it. We crush her now. The fleet surged forward, surrounding Hayes' ship, now surrounded on all sides by hegemony warships. The human vessel seemed small and fragile in comparison to the sheer firepower of Vox's fleet. The rest of the ships moved into place, positioning themselves for the kill. Then, without warning, the human ship exploded into motion, its engines flaring brighter than expected. Vox's eyes widened. She's charging. Before he could order a response, the human ship fired. But it wasn't aimed at the fleet. Instead, a single, focused beam shot out, not toward a ship, but toward the star itself. It struck with a brilliant flash of light, and the entire fleet shuddered under the force of the shockwave. "Shields up!" Vox barked. But it was too late. The shockwave swept across the fleet, causing their shields to flicker and their systems to glitch. The shockwave wasn't just physical, it was technological. Entire ship's systems went haywire. Communications scrambled. Weapons locked. Engines failed. "Admiral," Nexer's voice broke through the chaos. "She's hijacked our systems." Vox stood frozen, staring at the live feed from his command console, where his fleet had become a disorganized mess. Ships were colliding, some firing at each other in confusion. The human ship remained untouched, darting through the chaos with eerie precision. "How is she doing this?" Vox demanded, his voice low and filled with disbelief. "We don't know, Admiral," Nexer replied. "But we have to act quickly." Suddenly, a cold realization set in. "She's not running away," Vox muttered, finally understanding. "She's picking us off, one by one." The human had done it again. Not through brute force, but by manipulating the very technology they relied on. She was playing a game, and the hegemony was losing. With the fleet in disarray, Vox made the decision. "Withdraw. Now. I want every ship back to formation. Full retreat." The human ship didn't chase. Instead, it vanished back into the asteroid field, leaving behind a broken, confused fleet. The remaining ships limped away, their crews scrambling to regain control of their systems. As the war room fell into tense silence, Vox slammed his fist onto the command table. "Prepare for another assault. This time, we'll be ready for her." The war had only just begun, and Cassandra Hayes was proving to be more than the hegemony ever imagined. Admiral Vox stood alone in his private quarters, the cold blue light of the holographic display casting sharp shadows across his face. The flickering map showed the aftermath of the recent skirmish. The fleet had retreated, but not without significant damage. The casualty count was higher than expected. Over a dozen ships had suffered major system failures, their crews now stranded in the vast expanse of space, waiting for rescue. And all because of one human. "Why?" Vox muttered to himself, his voice barely audible against the hum of the command center. "Why has she become such a threat?" A sharp chime broke his concentration. The door slid open, and Nexer entered, his exoskeleton gleaming in the dim light. The second-in-command's expression was grim. "Admiral," Nexer began, his voice heavy with concern. "We've completed the analysis of the data we recovered from the human ship." Vox turned sharply, his gaze fixed on Nexer. "And?" Nexer stepped forward, placing a data pad on the table. "There's something you need to see." Vox took the pad, his fingers trembling slightly as he activated the holographic display. The image of the human vessel appeared first, followed by a series of encrypted files that had been recovered from the ship's systems. It was more than just a ship's log. The data was unsettling. Most of the files were encrypted, but the ones that had been decrypted told a chilling story. "Project Ascension," Vox read aloud, his voice barely a whisper. Nexer nodded. "It's not just a ship we're dealing with, Admiral. It's a weapon, a product of the hegemony's own experiments." Vox's mind raced. Project Ascension, he had heard whispers of it, a secret initiative from decades ago. It was supposed to be nothing more than a failed project, an experiment to enhance human neurological abilities. But this was different. He turned to Nexer. "What do you mean, product of our own experiments?" Nexer's eyes flickered as he accessed more data. The human, Cassandra Hayes, wasn't just some survivor of a failed program. She was the program's success. We designed her, developed her abilities to interface with technology, to control machines with her mind. Vox's stomach tightened as the weight of the revelation sank in. "We created her to be a weapon." Nexer nodded solemnly. "Yes. But what's worse, Admiral, is that she's not alone. She's one of 7 survivors. The others, they were disposed of as failures. Hayes escaped, and now she's hunting us." Vox slammed his fist against the table, the sound echoing through the room. How is this possible? How did we not know about this? Why wasn't I told? Nexer stepped back, his tone becoming more cautious. The project was classified, even within the hegemony. Only a select few knew of its existence, and once the experiment was deemed a failure, it was erased from the records. But Hayes, she's the one who got away. And now, she's using her abilities against us. Vox stared at the data in silence. The full scope of the threat was becoming clearer. Hayes wasn't just some rogue human. She was a product of their own making, a weapon designed to infiltrate and control technology. And now, that weapon was being turned against them. Why is she doing this? Vox muttered. Is she after revenge? Or is there something more? Nexer hesitated before answering. Both, perhaps. From the data, we've gathered that her parents were part of the original program. They were researchers. When the project ended, they were disposed of, likely to cover up the failures. But Hayes survived, and now she's hunting down the people responsible. Vox's eyes narrowed. So, this is personal for her. She's not just attacking us because of the threat we pose. She's seeking justice, revenge for what we did to her family. The realization hit Vox like a blow to the chest. The hegemony had been so focused on its expansion, on its own dominance, that it had created its own worst enemy. A single human, armed with powers no one could have anticipated, was now dismantling their empire, piece by piece. And the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. Vox clenched his fists. We've underestimated her at every turn. We've treated her like just another weak human, but she's a weapon, a force we can't control. This ends now. Nexer studied his commander, his eyes filled with uncertainty. Admiral, how do we stop her? We've already seen what she's capable of. The fleet can't hold up against her mind control, not without understanding her abilities better. Vox stood up, his gaze fixed on the holographic map. We need to learn everything we can about her. We need to find out how she manipulates our systems, how she controls our ships. And we need to do it before she cripples us completely. Turning back to Nexer, Vox's voice hardened. Prepare the fleet. We're not retreating anymore. We're going after her, head on. But this time, we'll be ready. Nexer nodded, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. And if we're not? Vox looked at his second-in-command, his expression unreadable. Then it's over. The war was no longer just about defeating a single human. It was about survival. The hegemony had created its own downfall, and now it was up to them to stop the very thing they had unleashed into the galaxy. The tension on the inevitable conquest was palpable as Admiral Vox paced the command room. The once confident fleet was now a fraction of its former strength, and the persistent threat of a single human was a bitter pill to swallow. In the span of just a few skirmishes, Cassandra Hayes had proven herself far more than a mere nuisance. She had become an existential threat to the hegemony itself. Admiral, we've located her, Nexer reported, his voice sharp, cutting through Vox's thoughts. The second-in-command's expression remained unreadable, but the fatigue was evident in his posture. Vox's steps faltered, his gaze snapping to the tactical display. There, in the deep space of the Proxima Centauri system, the human ship flickered to life on their sensors. Despite their losses, despite everything, she was still out there. Where exactly? Vox demanded, his voice a mixture of urgency and frustration. She's on the edge of the system, near the asteroid belt. She's been circling it for 2 cycles, Nexer replied, tapping a control pad. The hologram zoomed in on the small, unassuming blip. It's almost like she's waiting for us. Vox's lip curled into a grim smile. She's waiting for us, all right. She knows we'll come. And she knows she's still in control. He turned, his gaze sweeping over the officers at their stations. The fleet had suffered significant damage. The ships were tired, their crews shaken, but they were ready to strike back. They had no other choice. Prepare the fleet for an assault, Vox commanded, his voice steady despite the turmoil swirling in his mind. This time, we don't give her room to escape. No more running. We will trap her. As the fleet maneuvered into position, the tension in the air grew thick. Cassandra Hayes, alone aboard her ship, felt the familiar pull of the battlefield closing in. She had been tracking their movements for cycles now, calculating their every step. She knew they were coming, and she knew what they would do. It was almost predictable, but she wouldn't let them win this time. Her fingers danced over the ship's controls, her mind reaching out into the depths of the hegemony's fleet, probing their systems. She felt their presence, like a dark, mechanical pulse in the void. She could almost taste the fear they were trying to suppress, could sense their desperation. "They're close," she muttered under her breath, her voice calm, but filled with purpose. "Time to make them dance." The holographic display in front of her shifted, showing the approaching fleet, their movements predictable, their ships forming tight formations. They thought they had learned from their mistakes. She would show them just how much they had underestimated her. On the inevitable conquest, Vox watched the fleet's movements on the tactical display, his jaw tight. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This had to work. There was no other option. The human was too dangerous to leave unchecked. "We've got her cornered, Admiral," said Commander Krell, his voice gruff with anticipation. "We can hit her from all sides. She won't have anywhere to run." Vox nodded but didn't share Krell's confidence. "Don't make assumptions," he replied, his tone cold. "She's outwitted us before. Be prepared for anything." The fleet surged forward, moving in perfect synchrony as they closed in on the human ship. Cassandra watched them approach, her mind calculating, anticipating. She could feel the tension building, the ships drawing closer, the inevitable clash on the horizon. But this time, she had something different in mind. With a thought, she manipulated the ship's systems, activating a network of hidden sensors that had been dormant for cycles. They were set on a frequency the hegemony's technology couldn't track, a small, unnoticed advantage. She waited until the fleet was nearly within range, then struck. In a flash, the human ship surged forward, bypassing the fleet's defenses with lightning speed. Vox's eyes widened in disbelief. She was faster, too fast. And she wasn't retreating. What in the stars? Krell gasped as the human ship darted between two massive asteroid formations, impossibly weaving through the tight corridors. "She's moving like she knows our every move." "She does," Vox said quietly, his voice filled with a strange mixture of awe and dread. "She's been doing this from the start." The fleet faltered for just a moment, their movements hesitant, unsure. In that split second, Hayes' ship fired. It wasn't a typical attack. Instead, a massive pulse of energy rippled through the fleet's communications network, jamming their systems and distorting their sensors. "Systems failing," the comms officer shouted. "We can't track her. Our weapons are offline. Get them back online." Vox barked. "Now!" But Hayes had already anticipated this. Her next move was even more devastating. She launched a series of small drones from her ship, each one equipped with a single purpose: to disable the hegemony ships one by one. They moved like shadows, silently attaching themselves to the larger vessels and siphoning off their power, weakening the fleet from within. Chaos erupted as the fleet lost power, and ships began to drift helplessly in the void. Vox could only watch as the situation spiraled out of control. "We've been outplayed again," Nexer muttered, his voice filled with disbelief. Vox clenched his fists, but there was no anger in his heart. Only the cold realization that this battle, this war, wasn't just about technology or firepower. It was about a single human who had learned to turn the hegemony's greatest strength into its greatest weakness. Cassandra Hayes had done it again. The tide had turned. On her ship, Hayes watched the disarray unfold on her sensors. The hegemony was crumbling before her eyes. Their fleet was now little more than a collection of scattered ships, helpless against her will. She had them. And they knew it. "Time to finish this," she whispered, preparing for the final strike. But this time, it wasn't just about defeating them. It was about sending a message. The war was far from over. But today, Hayes had one. The command room of the inevitable conquest was eerily quiet. The once bustling energy had dissipated, replaced by the steady hum of a fleet in disarray. Vox stood before the shattered holographic display, watching as the broken fleet limped through space. The once mighty warships were now adrift, their systems scrambled, their crews scrambling to regain control. He clenched his fists at his sides, the frustration threatening to spill over. Every attempt to capture Cassandra Hayes had failed. The human had outsmarted them, dismantled their fleet, and left them floundering in her wake. "Admiral," Nexer's voice broke through the silence, his tone tense. "We've recovered some data from the damaged ships. We need to analyze it. There might be something we've missed." Vox turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. "What could we possibly have missed? She's defeated us in every possible way. Every single time." Nexer's gaze softened. "It's not over yet. If we're going to end this, we need to understand how she's doing it. How she's been so effective." Vox exhaled sharply, turning toward the large projection at the center of the room. The data was being processed, revealing fragments of their most recent encounters with the human. He took a step forward, his sharp eyes scanning the information. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "Her ship isn't anything special. Her technology is primitive compared to ours. She doesn't have the resources we do. How is she doing this?" Nexer approached, his exoskeleton clicking softly with each step. "She's not relying on technology, Admiral. It's her abilities. The data points to something beyond her control of our systems. She's manipulating us in ways we can't even comprehend." Vox's mind raced. "What are you suggesting?" Nexer took a breath before responding. "I believe Cassandra Hayes isn't just controlling our technology. She's influencing our minds. Her technopathy goes far beyond the machines. She's tapping into our mental systems, manipulating our very thoughts." Vox froze. "Mental systems?" Nexer nodded gravely. "Think about it. Every time we've faced her, we've been overwhelmed not just by her tactics, but by something else. A kind of mental pressure. Our officers report feeling disoriented, unsure of their own decisions. We've all felt it, even you, Admiral. That feeling of doubt, of being out of control." Vox's face paled as the pieces clicked together. "You think she's using her powers to manipulate our minds, to create confusion and doubt? To weaken us before the fight even starts?" "Yes," Nexer confirmed. "Her abilities are not just technological. They are psychological. She's a weapon we can't defend against because we don't even know how she's attacking us." Vox's mind raced as the revelation sank in. The loss of the fleet, the confusion, the sudden sense of helplessness in the face of such a small enemy, it all made sense now. Cassandra Hayes wasn't just outmaneuvering them. She was controlling them in ways they couldn't even see. He slammed his fist on the console in frustration. "How do we stop her, Nexer? How do we fight an enemy we can't even understand?" Nexer hesitated, his gaze darkening. "We need to neutralize her influence. We can't rely on our technology alone. We need to develop countermeasures. Something that will shield our minds from her abilities." Vox nodded slowly, a grim determination settling over him. "Then we'll make that our priority. Assemble a team. I want everything we know about mental defenses, psychological warfare, anything we can use to block her influence. We fight her with our minds, not just our weapons." Cassandra Hayes sat in the cockpit of her ship, her hands resting lightly on the controls. She had anticipated this moment, the moment when the hegemony would finally realize they weren't just dealing with a rogue human. They were dealing with someone who could see beyond their technology, who could reach into their very consciousness and manipulate their thoughts. She had watched them struggle. Watched them fall apart. They had underestimated her, just as they had underestimated every other human they had come across. But Hayes wasn't just another human. She was a product of their own creation, a weapon that had slipped through their fingers, a force they couldn't control. The data she had gathered was invaluable. The hegemony's fleet was scattered, their leaders divided, and now it was time to finish what she had started. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes scanning the stars outside. The next move would be decisive. But there was one question that lingered in her mind. How far am I willing to go to make them pay for what they did to my family? Back on the inevitable conquest, Vox's command had shifted. The sense of desperation was replaced by a new kind of urgency. The fleet's failure had exposed their greatest weakness, but it had also given them a new target, Hayes' mind. This isn't over, Vox muttered under his breath. He turned to Nexer. We will find a way to fight back. I won't let her bring the hegemony to its knees. Nexer's eyes gleamed with a quiet resolve. We'll make sure of it, Admiral. And as the fleet regrouped, preparing for a confrontation that would decide the fate of the hegemony, one thing was clear. The war had shifted. The battle for control wasn't just over ships or weapons, it was a battle for the mind. And this time, Vox knew, the stakes had never been higher. The inevitable conquest hung in the void like a wounded beast, its massive frame casting a long shadow over the fleet's scattered ships. The recent failures had not only crippled their forces but shattered the morale of the crew. The hegemony's fleet, once the most formidable force in the galaxy, now found itself reeling from the surprise tactics of a single human. Admiral Vox stood at the helm of it all, a war-weary leader now facing the final moments of their campaign. His hands rested on the command table, eyes fixed on the projection of the human ship. It was tiny in comparison to the vast armada surrounding it, fragile, even by human standards. But Vox knew better than anyone that appearances were deceiving. Cassandra Hayes had proven time and again that she was more than a threat. She was the storm on the horizon, and the hegemony was running out of time. Admiral, we've pinpointed her location again, Nexer said, his voice tight with focus. She's positioned herself near a gravitational anomaly, just beyond the pulsar belt. It's a good tactical move. It'll give her cover if she needs to escape. Vox's eyes darkened. Escape? He turned to Nexer, his tone laced with disbelief. She's not running anymore. She knows we're coming. She's preparing for us. The officers around the table shifted nervously, their attention fixated on the Admiral. The realization of what Vox had just said hung in the air. Hayes was no longer the hunted, she was the hunter. We've tried everything, Krell, the grizzled commander of the assault division, spoke up. Direct assaults, traps, ambushes. She's outsmarted us at every turn. What's left? Vox didn't respond immediately. His eyes remained locked on the tactical map as the human ship's position blinked ominously. We have one final option, he said quietly. A high-risk maneuver. It's the only way to guarantee we neutralize her. Nexer raised an eyebrow. What are you suggesting, Admiral? Vox straightened, his gaze hardening. We'll sacrifice part of the fleet. Draw her in, force her to engage, and then catch her off guard. If we succeed, we'll finally capture her. If not? If not? Krell interrupted. If not, we lose everything, Vox finished grimly. But we have no choice. Aboard Hayes' ship, Cassandra watched the projection of the hegemony fleet in her cockpit. They were closing in, 50 ships, each one a bastion of power and destruction. She knew what they were planning. They had been predictable from the start, despite their technological advantage. Now, they were playing their final card, and it was one she had prepared for. She stood up from the controls, the hum of the ship vibrating through her bones. Her mind reached out, connecting with the vast expanse of the fleet, searching for vulnerabilities, for any weakness. She could feel them, their uncertainty, their fear, and it made her smile. She had them right where she wanted them. Let them come, she whispered to herself. Her fingers moved over the console, preparing her ship for the impending clash. There was no turning back. Back on the inevitable conquest, Vox had given the order. The fleet began to split into 3 distinct groups, a decoy force, the main assault group, and a reserve unit that would move in for the kill. The decoy would draw Cassandra Hayes into the open, while the assault group would hit her head-on. The reserve group would wait for the opportune moment, ready to trap her when she least expected it. Vox stood at the front of the command room, his mind racing with the plan. He was placing everything on this last gamble. He had no choice. His pride, his honor, the future of the hegemony, it all depended on it. "We move in 5 cycles, Vox said, turning to Krell. "I want no hesitation. When the decoy strikes, the rest of the fleet hits hard. We cannot let her escape again." Krell's jaw tightened. "Understood, Admiral. It will be done." Cassandra Hayes' mind sharpened as she felt the hegemony's fleet draw closer. They were split, moving into their positions. The decoy force was predictable. She'd already anticipated their movements. It was exactly what she wanted. She knew the decoys were meant to distract her, but they wouldn't be enough. Not now. With a deep breath, she reached out to her ship's systems, flooding them with her energy. The ship hummed, its engines powering up in response to her will. She moved her ship into the narrow passage between 2 asteroids, hiding in the shadows. Let them think they had the upper hand. Let them think they were luring her into a trap. She was the trap. As the fleet closed in on the pulsar belt, Vox watched the decoy ships begin their assault. The human ship had moved into position just as expected. It was a simple trap, bait for Hayes to take. As the decoys launched their attack, Vox's heart raced. "Now," he commanded. The main fleet surged forward, weapons locked, cannons charged. But just as they moved to engage, a sudden, blinding flash erupted in front of them. Vox's eyes widened in disbelief. The human ship was not where they thought it was. Hayes had anticipated every move. "Admiral!" Krell shouted from his station. "We've been drawn into her trap." Vox's hands clenched around the edge of the table. It was happening again. They had fallen right into her hands. Hayes' ship materialized from the shadows, its engines roaring as it shot forward with deadly precision. The hegemony fleet was disoriented, scattered, their formation broken as they scrambled to adjust to her sudden appearance. "Now it's my turn," Hayes whispered, her voice calm and cold. She sent a pulse of energy cascading through the fleet, disabling their communication systems and causing ships to fire on one another in confusion. The decoy ships were the first to fall. But the true danger came from her next move. She launched a swarm of small, precision-guided drones, each designed to infiltrate the hegemony ship's defenses and disable them one by one. The drones were silent, efficient, and deadly. Vox watched helplessly as his fleet fell apart. The ships, once so confident in their might, were now nothing more than sitting targets. And Cassandra Hayes was the predator, picking them off one by one. As the chaos unfolded, Vox's last hope dwindled. His fleet was losing, and they were losing fast. He watched helplessly as the main assault group was decimated, its ships falling apart under Hayes' relentless assault. The reserve group remained on standby, but it was clear now that no amount of reinforcements would save them. In that moment, Vox realized the truth. Hayes wasn't just fighting them. She was dismantling everything the hegemony had built. And in the silence of space, he finally understood. They had lost. The inevitable conquest drifted like a broken beast, its once proud engine sputtering as it limped through space. Around it, the remnants of the hegemony fleet scattered like leaves in a storm. The remaining ships were crippled, their systems a mess of glitches and failures. The human ship, Cassandra Hayes' ship, moved through the chaos like a shadow, silent, calculating, and relentless. Admiral Vox stood in the war room, the soft hum of the failing fleet systems a constant reminder of their defeat. His gaze was fixed on the central projection, where the once formidable fleet had been reduced to a handful of battered warships, struggling to stay operational. His mind raced, trying to process the series of catastrophic events that had unfolded over the past few cycles. How had they allowed this to happen? "Admiral," Nexer's voice cut through the thick silence. "We've lost communication with over half of our ships. Those that are still operational are running on minimal power. We can't control them." Vox didn't respond immediately. His eyes scanned the holographic map, where Hayes' ship appeared once again, now moving toward the center of the wreckage. She was calm, unhurried, as though this victory had been a foregone conclusion. The human had done it. She had completely dismantled the might of the hegemony with nothing but her mind and a small, outdated vessel. "Admiral, we need to make a decision." Krell's voice was strained, filled with frustration. "The remaining fleet is not going to hold. The situation is slipping away from us." Vox's mind worked through the situation, a sense of helplessness clawing at his chest. He knew Krell was right. They couldn't continue this fight. Not like this. Hayes had already won, and now the hegemony was facing the consequences of its arrogance. "Prepare the remaining ships for retreat," Vox said, his voice calm but heavy. "We can't afford to lose more. Get them into the nearest star system, away from her reach." Krell nodded, but the pain of defeat was evident on his face. He had never seen Vox so defeated. "And what about the human? What do we do about her?" Vox turned toward Krell, his eyes dark with resolve. "We'll regroup. But if she comes after us again, we will not run. We fight." Cassandra Hayes watched the fleet from her cockpit, her fingers gently tapping the controls. The wreckage of the hegemony fleet was scattered across the system like a graveyard, ships still drifting, their lights flickering in the emptiness of space. Hayes had seen it all before, the pride, the arrogance, and now the devastation. The hegemony's reign had come to an end, not by military strength, but by the ingenuity of one human who had been discarded like an experiment gone wrong. She had done it. The victory was hers, and with it came a bittersweet satisfaction. The hegemony had taken everything from her. They had destroyed her family, and now, she had made them pay. But this wasn't just about revenge. This was about justice, about showing the galaxy that no empire, no matter how powerful, could continue its reign of terror without consequence. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft ping from her ship's comms. A transmission. She opened it, and the holographic figure of Admiral Vox appeared on the screen, his face haggard, eyes filled with something she hadn't expected to see: defeat. Cassandra Hayes, Vox's voice was steady, but there was no mistaking the weight behind his words. "You've won. The fleet is in ruins. I'm requesting terms for surrender." Hayes' fingers hovered over the controls, a mixture of surprise and caution filling her mind. She hadn't expected this. Vox, the great leader of the hegemony, was asking for surrender. "What terms do you have in mind, Admiral?" she asked, her voice calm, but with a hint of curiosity. Vox hesitated for a moment before speaking. "We will acknowledge your victory. We will declassify all information regarding Project Ascension, the experiments you were subjected to, and the hegemony's involvement in them. We will provide reparations for the lives lost, for the pain caused. We will dismantle the directorate responsible for the program." Hayes leaned back in her seat, taking in his words. The offer was unexpected, and part of her wanted to refuse, to continue the fight, to make them pay for every life they had taken. But another part of her knew this was the moment when the hegemony could no longer hide behind its mask of superiority. "You've already caused enough damage, Vox," she said, her voice colder than before. "Your empire has enslaved, experimented, and destroyed countless lives. And now, you want to make amends? You can't just erase your crimes with a few words." Vox's expression softened, a flicker of regret crossing his face. "I know the damage is irreparable. But I will do what I can. I've seen the truth now. The hegemony must change, or it will cease to exist." Cassandra stared at the transmission, her mind spinning with possibilities. She had won, but the real work was just beginning. This wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about ensuring that the hegemony's reign of terror ended, and that the galaxy would never forget the cost of their arrogance. She leaned forward, her fingers tapping once more on the controls. "I'll accept your terms, Admiral. But understand this, you may surrender now, but I will ensure that the hegemony pays for what it's done. No one is beyond justice." The transmission ended, and for a moment, Cassandra sat in silence. The battle was over, but the war, her war, was far from finished. And in the distance, the stars seemed to flicker just a little brighter. Back on the inevitable conquest, Vox stared at the dark screen, the weight of his decisions pressing heavily on his shoulders. The hegemony had lost. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: nothing would ever be the same. The galaxy had changed, and so had he. "We live to fight another day," he whispered, his voice carrying the burden of his failures. The inevitable conquest had barely escaped destruction, its once majestic frame now a shell of what it had been. Most of the hegemony fleet had been decimated or scattered to the far reaches of the galaxy. The survivors, now humbled and broken, drifted toward a distant star system, unsure of what to do next. They had underestimated a single human, and in doing so, had lost more than just ships. They had lost their pride, their certainty, and their control over the galaxy. Admiral Vox stood on the bridge, staring out at the empty expanse of space. The damage to the fleet was severe, and the repairs would take cycles, if they could be done at all. But it wasn't just the ships that needed mending. The hegemony itself needed to be rebuilt, reshaped into something entirely different. Hayes had made sure of that. Her victory, though devastating, had cracked the foundation of their empire wide open. "Admiral, we've received another transmission," Nexer's voice was low, cautious. "It's from Hayes." Vox didn't flinch. He had expected this. After all, it was Hayes who had forced the hegemony to come to terms. It was Hayes who had made them confront the darkness they had long buried. He had already accepted that the days of the hegemony's domination were over. What was left to decide was whether the galaxy would see the Empire fall entirely or if something new could rise from the ashes. "Put it through," Vox said, his voice as calm as he could make it. The holographic projection flickered to life, showing Cassandra Hayes standing in front of a backdrop of stars. Her face, once cold with vengeance, was now calm, but there was an undeniable fire in her eyes. She was no longer the hunted, but the one who held the power. "Admiral Vox," she began, her voice measured, "I'm not here to gloat. I've already won. The terms have been set. But what happens now is up to you." Vox stood still, his hands clasped behind his back. He had no response at first, but the weight of her words landed heavy in the room. Hayes continued, her gaze unwavering. "You have a choice. The hegemony can rebuild, but it will never be the same. You can't continue as you were. If you want any chance at survival, at respect, you need to change. And it starts with your people." Vox clenched his jaw. "And what do you want from us, Hayes?" She tilted her head slightly, as if considering the question. "Nothing from you. But everything from your empire. I've given you the chance to make reparations. Your crimes, Project Ascension, the destruction of entire species, the countless lives lost, those cannot be erased. But you can begin making it right. Publicly." The silence that followed was deafening. Vox's thoughts were racing, but he knew Hayes was right. He had already witnessed the collapse of the fleet and the hegemony's once unshakable dominance. But the hegemony's power was not just in its ships. It was in its influence over countless worlds, its ability to control civilizations. Would that be enough to build a new future, or had Hayes' victory truly marked the end of everything they had ever known? "Make no mistake, Vox," Hayes' voice broke through his thoughts. "The hegemony must dissolve the Science Directorate. Project Ascension needs to be exposed in full. The atrocities you've committed will be made known. You can't silence the truth anymore." Vox exhaled sharply, the weight of his choices pressing down on him. This was not the victory he had envisioned for the hegemony. This was something else entirely. It was a reckoning. "If we comply with your demands," he said slowly, "what do you expect in return?" Hayes' lips parted in a faint smile, but it wasn't one of triumph, it was a smile of someone who had done what was necessary, and now saw the path forward. "I don't expect anything from you personally. But your people must understand the consequences of their actions. The hegemony will be no more than a relic unless it changes its ways. The galaxy doesn't need another empire, it needs cooperation. And the first step toward that is accountability." Vox nodded, his gaze flickering to the stars outside the ship. The silence that followed seemed like an eternity, but in truth, it was just a few moments where the weight of history seemed to collapse on him. "You've forced our hand, Hayes," Vox said quietly, but with a hint of resignation in his tone. "And you're right. This empire can't continue as it was. You've won. But the hegemony will not fall into anarchy. If there is to be change, it will come with order." Hayes' smile grew slightly, but it was still a shadow of what it had been. "I'll hold you to that. Remember, Vox, what you decide in the next few cycles will shape the future. For your people and for all those you've harmed." The transmission ended, and the room fell into a quiet stillness. Vox's mind raced with thoughts, doubts, and the weight of his actions. He had been humbled by one human. And now, he had to make a choice. "We move forward," he said quietly to Nexer. "The hegemony will not repeat the mistakes of the past. We will begin the process of declassifying the Project Ascension files and dismantling the Directorate. And from now on, we will look to build something new, something that doesn't rule through fear." Nexer nodded. "Understood, Admiral. But, what happens now? The galaxy won't just accept the hegemony's surrender without consequences." Vox's gaze was distant, focused on the vast unknown that lay ahead. "The consequences will be great. But we will endure. And maybe, just maybe, we'll be able to show the galaxy that we can change." As Vox turned to leave the bridge, his steps were slow, but there was a renewed purpose in his stride. The hegemony had fallen, but a new order was beginning to take shape. One that would be built on the fragile foundation of accountability, and the hope that change, though painful, could lead to something better. Outside the ship, the stars continued to shine brightly, indifferent to the shifts of power that had just unfolded. The galaxy would move on, forever changed.